Some winters do not begin with snow. They begin with a door closing, a purse snapping shut, a neighbor looking away, and a mother learning how thin pride can become when children are hungry. Folks like to say the frontier made people hard, but that is only half the truth. It also showed, plain as a lantern in a dark window, who would step forward when cruelty had been given a respectable name. The auction bell clanged outside the livery stable in Abilene, Kansas, sharp enough to split the gray November rain. Nell Kincaid stumbled when the muddy boardwalk ended, catching herself with one hand around the handle of an old carpet bag and the other pressed against the back of a small boy. The boy's name was Robbie, and he was 6 years old, though hunger had made his wrists look younger. Against Nell's breast, wrapped in a faded blue shawl with 3 missing tassels, his baby sister whimpered and rooted blindly for milk Nell no longer had. "Stand him up there," called Mr. Silas Greaves from the dry shelter of the livery doors. "Let folks see what's being bid on." Nell stopped in the rain. Robbie's fingers clamped around 2 of her skirt buttons like he could hold her in the world by them. "Mama," he whispered, "are they selling us like horses?" The baby sneezed, a small wet sound that made one of the men near the hitching rail look down at his boots. Nell lifted her chin, though the rain ran under her collar and down her spine. "No," she said softly. "They're only proving what kind of men they are. Before we go farther, tell me where you are watching from tonight." If this story touches that quiet place in you that still believes dignity can be protected, please like, share, and subscribe. Now come back with me to that cold Kansas street, where a mother was trying not to break in front of her children. She had walked 3 miles through mud that morning, from the wash house where she had been turned out before sunrise. Her shoes were split at the toes. Her hem was black with rose slush. In the carpet bag were 2 baby cloths, a chipped comb, 1 tin cup, a Bible with no cover, and a small cedar box containing a brass button from her dead husband's coat. The button had been bright once. She kept it because Ezra Kincaid had touched it the day he kissed Robbie's newborn forehead and said, "I will build us a good life, Nell. You will see." He had not lived long enough to learn how expensive a grave could be. Silas Greaves held the debt note high between 2 fingers, so the rain could not stain it. $20 owed, he announced. Board, flour, doctor's powders, burial charge advanced, and 2 months' arrears for the wash shed room. Widow Kincaid cannot pay. As allowed by county arrangement, service may be contracted to any household willing to assume debt and keep the dependents from the poor farm. "Poor farm takes separate," muttered a woman beneath a black umbrella. "That baby won't last there." "I got enough mouths," said a farmer, tugging his hat low. A drover laughed. $20 for a worn-out widow, a boy, and a sick baby. "Greaves, you're asking full price for bad weather." Nell's face did not move. She had learned that tears encouraged men who liked power. Robbie looked at the livery's open doors. Inside, horses shifted in warm straw. Steam rose from their backs. A lantern swung from a nail and made the brass buckles glow. The smell of oats drifted out, rich and unbearable. "Can I have that piece?" Robbie whispered. Nell followed his eyes to a crust of bread lying near a crate, damp at the edges where someone had dropped it. Her throat tightened. "Not off the ground. I'd brush it." "No." He nodded as if he understood pride, though his stomach gave a long, hollow growl. Greaves heard it and smiled without kindness. "See there? Boy's ready to work for his keep." The crowd shifted. Wagons stood in the muddy street, wheels sunk deep. A team of mules stamped and blew. Rain slid off hat brims, down collars, over the rough plank fronts of the mercantile and bank and barber shop. The church bell in the distance gave one dull note as the wind struck it. Then Daniel Eldridge came out of the rain. No one noticed him at first because Daniel had a way of entering places as if he did not expect the world to make room. He rode a rangy bay mare with a white scar down her neck. His slicker was dark with water, his hat brim low, his beard rough from days without trimming. He was not young, but he was not old, somewhere around 35, with a kind of shoulders made by work that did not care whether a man had slept. He drew rein beside the hitching rail. "Eldridge," Greaves called. "Come for our nails or feed." Daniel did not answer. That was the way of him, folks said. Silent Daniel Eldridge from the north section, out beyond Smoky Creek. A man could trade cattle with him, share fence line with him, sit across from him in church, and hear no more than 3 words in a month. Some said grief had taken his tongue. Some said a Comanche raid in Texas had done it. Some said he had nothing worth saying. Nell had seen him once before, from across the mercantile, buying salt, lamp oil, and a spool of black thread. He had paid exact, nodded once, and left. Now he sat still in the rain, looking at the shawl around the baby. Greaves shook the note. "We're settling charity accounts. Bid starts at $20. Widow's able-bodied enough. Boy can haul kindling. Baby is a burden, but someone with a woman in the house might manage. Who will assume the debt?" No one spoke. The baby began to cry in earnest, a weak, scraped little cry. Nell shifted her, trying to shelter her under her own thin jacket. The blue shawl slipped and showed the child's bare ankle, purple from cold. Daniel's gloved hand tightened on the reins. 15, then, Greaves said. "I'll take a loss if some Christian soul will relieve the town." Nell turned on him. "You will not lower my children like spoiled flour." A few women gasped. Greaves' smile vanished. "You had your chance to pay, Mrs. Kincaid. And you had your chance to be decent." The crowd went quiet in the special way crowds do, when they are ashamed and curious all at once. Greaves stepped closer. "Careful. Pride feeds no baby." "No," Nell said. "But neither does your mercy." He flushed. $10. Robbie hid his face in Nell's skirt. Daniel dismounted. The sound of his boots in mud was slow and heavy. One step, then another. His mare dropped her head as if she knew he would not be leaving quick. Greaves frowned. "You bidding?" Daniel reached inside his coat and took out a worn leather pouch. His hands were large, knuckles scarred, nails broken from fence work. He loosened the string and counted coins into his palm. Rain struck the silver and made little bright stars. Greaves held out his hand. Daniel did not give him the money. Instead, he looked at Nell. His eyes were gray, not soft, but steady. They did not run over her like the other men's eyes had. They did not measure her arms, her age, her usefulness. They stayed on her face, as if she were a person standing in a storm. "You willing?" he asked. The 2 words were rough, as though they had traveled a long way up from inside him. Nell did not understand. "Willing to what?" "To come under my roof until you choose otherwise," Greaves snapped. "This is debt service, Eldridge, not a parlor arrangement." Daniel turned his head. That single look stopped the auction colder than the rain. "I asked her," Daniel said. The livery seemed to shrink around the words. The drovers stopped smiling. The banker's clerk looked away. Even the mule team stilled a moment. Greaves gave a brittle laugh. "You pay the note, you take responsibility. That is the law of it." Daniel stepped up onto the livery threshold and put the $20 on the grain ledger just inside the door, where it would stay dry. Debt paid. Greaves reached for the money. Daniel laid one hand over the coins. "Receipt?" Greaves stiffened. "You think I would cheat you?" Daniel said nothing. Silence can be a wall when a man knows how to build it. The auctioneer cursed under his breath, went inside, and scratched out a receipt. Rain drummed on the roof. Nell stood in the street with her children and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Paid, not bought. The difference was a plank over a deep ditch, and she was not yet sure it would hold. Daniel took the paper, folded it once, and held it out to Nell. She did not reach at first. He waited. At last she took it. Her fingers brushed his glove, and she felt how cold he was. "This belongs to you," he said. Robbie peeked around her skirt. "Mister, do you have bread?" A murmur moved through the crowd. Nell closed her eyes. Daniel looked down at the boy. Robbie swallowed. Do you have to sell us again if we eat it? Daniel's jaw shifted. He glanced toward the mercantile, then back at Robbie. No. It was the plainest word Nell had ever heard, and somehow the largest. Daniel led them to the general store first, though Nell said the baby needed a stove more than anything. He did not argue. He went in ahead of them, dripping rain on the plank floor. Mrs. Ada Prine, the storekeeper's wife, stood behind the counter arranging bolts of calico dye. Her mouth pinched when Nell entered. Mrs. Kimcaro. Nell held the baby tighter. Mrs. Prine. Daniel pointed at flour, beans, coffee, bacon, cornmeal, sugar, and a small jar of peppermint sticks on the shelf behind the counter. Ada Prine blinked. All that? Daniel nodded. For your ranch? He nodded again, though his eyes cut briefly toward Robbie. Cash? He put coins down. Ada gathered the goods in paper and cloth. Her gaze kept sliding to Nell's wet dress, to the baby's shawl, to Robbie's thin cheeks. I heard what happened, Nell said. Most of town did. Ada's face reddened. I did not mean. No one ever does. Robbie stood beside a barrel of crackers, hands behind his back, staring so hard that one might have thought he was praying over them. Daniel lifted the lid, took a handful of crackers, and passed them to him. Robbie looked at Nell first. That small obedience nearly undid her. She nodded. He ate one too fast, coughed, and pressed another against the baby's lips as if she could chew it. Not Clara, Nell said gently. She needs milk. Daniel turned to Ada and pointed toward the back room. Goat? Ada hesitated. Mrs. Barlow keeps one behind the laundry, but she won't sell milk on credit. Daniel put another coin on the counter. Ada took it and reached for a bottle. I can send my boy now, Daniel said. She did. While they waited, Robbie chose not to eat the last cracker. He wrapped it in his fist, warming it, saving it. Nell watched him and hated every hour that had taught him to save food from his own mouth. Daniel noticed too. He said nothing, but he bought the peppermint sticks. The road north from Abilene was a long seam of mud under a sky, the color of lead. Daniel's wagon had a cracked sideboard, a canvas cover patched with feed sacks, and a lantern tied near the front, though it was barely afternoon. Nell sat in the bed with the children tucked between sacks of flour and a rolled buffalo robe Daniel had taken from behind the seat. The robe smelled of horse smoke and sun. It was warmer than anything she owned. Robbie fell asleep before they left town. His hand remained closed around the cracker. Clara drank goat milk from the bottle in small, desperate pulls, then whimpered with each breath. She was 9 months old and too light. Nell kept touching the baby's cheek to make sure warmth was returning. Daniel drove without speaking. Rain ran from his hat brim. The mare pulled slow through ruts, and the wheels sucked at the mud. Twice he climbed down to shoulder the spokes free. Each time Nell started to rise, and each time he lifted one hand, not stopping her like a master, but asking her to spare the baby the cold. At the creek crossing, water ran brown and fast over the low stones. Daniel stopped. Nell looked past the wagon cover. Is it too deep? He studied the water, the bank, the sky. Rising. We should go back? His shoulders tightened at the word back. No. He took a rope from under the seat and tied it from the wagon tongue to his saddle horn. Then he removed his coat and laid it over Nell's knees, though he already had only a wet shirt beneath. I can't take that, she said. He did not look at her. You can. It's yours. Baby's cold. That settled the argument because he knew exactly where her pride could not stand. He led the mare into the creek first, boots disappearing to the shin. The wagon lurched. Nell braced one hand against the sideboard and one around Clara. Robbie woke with a cry. Mama, I'm here. Are we drowning? No, the water shoved at the wheels. The mare snorted, slipped, found purchase, pulled. Daniel walked beside her in the current, one hand on the bridle, one on the wagon tongue. The rope went taut, muddy water broke against his thighs. Halfway across, the rear wheel struck a hidden stone and jolted hard. Nell hit her shoulder against a flour sack. Clara screamed. Robbie dropped his cracker into the wet straw. "No!" he cried, scrambling for it. Nell caught his coat before he could reach over the side. "Robbie, leave it!" "But I saved it," Daniel heard. In the rain and creek roar, somehow he heard. Once the wagon climbed the far bank, he stopped, reached into the fruit sack, and handed back not one cracker, but two. Robbie stared at them. "For dropping brave," Daniel said. Robbie frowned. "That don't make sense." "No." Then, for the first time, Nell saw the smallest crease at the corner of Daniel Eldridge's mouth. His ranch lay in a hollow where the prairie dipped towards Smoky Creek and cottonwoods leaned black against the weather. The house was not much from the road, just a low cabin with a stone chimney, a lean-to shed, and a barn whose roof sagged at the west corner. But smoke rose from the chimney. A gate hung straight. Wood was stacked under cover. Someone had set stones along the path to keep boots above the mud. A man who stacked wood before winter was not a reckless man. Daniel pulled the wagon near the porch. Now saw curtains in none of the windows. The house looked awake, but uninhabited, as if it had been waiting without hope. He went inside first, struck flame to a lamp, and opened the door wide. Warmth rolled out, faint, but real. Nell stepped in carrying Clara. The room was plain. A stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, a shelf with tin plates and cups, pegs with a coat, a rifle, a bridle, and a black bonnet that had not been touched in a long while. In the corner stood a cradle, covered with a folded quilt. Nell stopped when she saw it. Daniel came in behind her with Robbie asleep against his shoulder. He followed her gaze to the cradle, and something shut behind his eyes. "I move it," he said. "No," Nell replied. "Too quickly, perhaps. A baby needs somewhere to sleep." He stood a moment, rain dripping from his sleeve. Then he carried Robbie to the bed in the small back room, removed the boy's shoes without waking him, and came out. The bed had once been Daniel's. He gave it up without announcement. Nell laid Clara in the cradle after warming a cloth by the stove and rubbing the baby's feet until they pinked. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar and lavender gone old. Clara fussed, then caught one corner in her fist and quieted. "She likes the edge," Nell said. "Always has to hold something." Daniel's hand rested on the back of a chair. "So did Ruth." The name entered the room softly, like a person not wanting to disturb anyone. Nell looked at the black bonnet on the peg. "Your wife?" He nodded. "I'm sorry." He gave no answer, which was answer enough. That first night, they ate at the table because Nell insisted children did not learn hope from eating in bed like strays. Daniel warmed beans and bacon, cut bread, poured coffee for her, and milk for Robbie. Robbie woke halfway through supper and ate with both hands until Nell touched his wrist. Slow, he froze, ashamed. Daniel pushed his own plate toward the boy. "Plenty." Robbie looked from the plate to Daniel. "You sure?" Daniel broke the bread in half, put part on Robbie's plate, and kept part for himself. "Now it's plenty twice." Robbie considered this arithmetic and accepted it. Nell ate last after feeding Clara, though Daniel placed a full plate before her 3 times. She was used to counting bites. 1 for Robbie, 1 for Clara if softened, 1 for tomorrow. Her body did not trust food set down without a catch. When she finally lifted the fork, her hand trembled. Daniel saw and looked away to spare her. That courtesy made tears come nearer than the auction had. After supper, she rose to wash dishes. "You don't owe work tonight," Daniel said. Nell turned from the stove. "I sure know how to sit in a house where my children have eaten and do nothing." He considered that. Then he took a drying cloth from a nail and stood beside her at the basin. They washed in silence. Rain tapped the roof. Robbie slept on a pallet near the stove, one hand tucked under his cheek, the other still guarding a peppermint stick. Clara breathed in the cradle with a faint whistle in her chest. Daniel dried each plate carefully and set it on the shelf. He did not do it as if helping a woman. He did it as if dishes mattered, because people had eaten from them. Nell looked at his hands, at the scars over the knuckles. "Mr. Eldridge," Daniel, she swallowed. "Daniel, I am grateful for what you did, but I will not be kept as charity." His eyes lifted to hers. "I can cook, mend, wash, keep hens, split kindling if the pieces aren't too large, tend a kitchen garden, make soap, read accounts, stitch wounds, and teach Robbie his letters. I can pay back $20 if you give me time." He leaned the plate on the shelf. "You can stay. That is not a wage." "No, what is it then?" He looked toward the cradle. The firelight moved across his face, showing lines that had not come from age, but from enduring. "A roof," he said. She waited for more. He had no more. So now nodded. "Then I will earn the roof until I decide what comes next." Something like respect moved between them. Not warm yet, but sturdy. In the morning, the storm had hardened into sleet. It struck the windows and made the prairie shine with a skin of ice. Nell woke before dawn on the floor near the stove, Clara against her side, and Robbie curled at her feet. For one panicked breath, she did not know where she was. Then she smelled wood smoke and coffee. Daniel stood at the stove in his shirt sleeves, pouring batter into a skillet. He did not turn. "Baby coughed at 3, he said. "You heard?" He flipped the cake awkwardly. It folded over itself. Nell rose, wincing at stiffness. "You have to wait for the bubbles." He handed her the spatula without pride. She fixed breakfast while he brought in wood. The cabin changed under her hands before the sun cleared the cottonwoods. Ash shaken down, coffee strained, Robbie's face washed. Clara's shawl warmed, the table wiped of flour dust. A cracked crock moved to catch the drip by the window. Daniel came in with an armload of split oak and stopped, looking around as if the house had spoken a language he had forgotten. Robbie sat at the table, licking molasses from his tomb. "Mama says I can feed hens if you got some." Daniel stacked the wood. "Got 12. Do they bite? Only liars." Robbie grew very still. "I don't lie except when I told Mrs. Barlow I wasn't hungry, because Mama was crying." Nell closed her eyes. Daniel crouched by the boy's chair. "That ain't the biting kind." Robbie studied him. "What is?" Daniel thought a while. "The kind that steals eggs?" Robbie nodded gravely. "I want steel eggs." "Then you'll do." The hens lived behind the shed in a coop patched with barrel staves. Sleet clicked off the roof. Robbie carried feed in a tin cup with both hands, face solemn with responsibility. A red hen pecked near his boot, and he jumped, spilling half the corn. Daniel did not laugh. He knelt and showed Robbie how to scatter low and wide. Nell watched from the porch with Clara bundled inside her jacket. The baby's fever had not risen, but the cough worried her. She had heard that same tight sound from children who did not see spring. "Do you have onion?" she asked when Daniel returned. He blinked for poultice. "And honey, if there is any." He went to the pantry and brought a sack of onions, a jar of honey crystallized at the bottom, and a look that asked no foolish questions. By noon, Clara slept with warm onion cloth on her chest and honey water on her tongue. Nell used Daniel's cleanest shirt to make small squares for baby rags, because the old ones were worn thin. She mended the tear after and folded the shirt on his chair. He noticed. After dinner she found the black bonnet still on the peg. Dust lay along its brim. Beneath it hung a small slate on a string, the kind a child might practice letters on. One corner was cracked. Nell touched neither. That evening, Daniel sat by the stove sharpening a knife. Robbie watched every scrape of stone. "Can I learn?" "No." Robbie's mouth fell. Daniel tested the edge with his tomb. "When your hand stops shaking from hunger," the boy looked down at his fingers and tried to still them. Nell said, "That was not unkind, Robbie." "I know," Robbie said. though he did not. Later, after the children slept, Nell sat across from Daniel at the table. A lamp burned between them. Rainwater ticked from the eaves into a barrel outside. "You lost a child too," she said. Daniel's hand closed around his cup. "I saw the cradle and the slate for a time. Only the stove spoke." "Boy," he said at last. "Samuel." 4. Nell's heart folded softly around the name. Fever, diphtheria, and Ruth. After one word, a whole graveyard. Nell looked at the brass button in her palm. She had taken it from the cedar box to remind herself she had once been someone's cherished wife, not a debt being auctioned. The lamplight caught the worn rim. "Ezra went under a wagon outside Junction City," she said. "A freight wagon. The men who hired him said accidents cost enough without widow trouble." Daniel looked at the button. "He had a coat with 6 of these. I sold the coat for burial money. Kept one. Foolish, my bay." Daniel shook his head. She expected him to say something comforting. He did not. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and took out a narrow red ribbon, faded, almost brown. He laid it beside the button. "Ruth tied Samuel's hair with that when he wouldn't let her cut it," he said. Nell smiled despite the ache. "A boy with ribbon in his hair? Mean as a rooster if you mentioned it." The smile faded into silence, but not an empty one. Their dead sat with them a moment, not as ghosts demanding sorrow, but as names finally allowed breath. Days gathered slowly. The sleet became snow, then rain again, then a bitter wind that combed the prairie flat. Nell learned the Eldridge place by work. The pump handle needed a cloth wrapped around it, or it bit skin with cold. The kitchen door stuck, unless lifted with the knee. The pantry held more beans than flour. The north window rattled. One stove lid smoked unless turned a quarter inch. The bay mare liked apple peel. The rooster was a coward. The cradle creaked on the third rock. Daniel learned now the same way. She hummed only when measuring flour. She saved bacon grease in a chipped blue cup. She never sat with her back to a door. She cut Robbie's bread thicker than her own. If someone raised a voice, she went still before she went angry. She could mend a rib so fine, it looked like a heel scar. When Clara coughed at night, Nell woke before the cough finished. Robbie changed first. Children do when safety arrives. His cheeks filled a little. He began to ask questions in bunches. Why did horses sleep standing up? How did smoke know where to go out? Could a rooster be taught manners? Did Mr. Daniel ever smile on purpose? Daniel answered some, not all. One morning Robbie came in from the coop holding an egg in both hands, eyes wide. It was warm. Nell smiled. Fresh eggs are. It felt like a secret. Daniel, standing by the door, said, "Most good things do." Robbie carried that sentence all day, as if it were another egg. Clara took longer. She remained fretful, watchful for a baby, slow to laugh. But she liked Daniel's watch chain. When he sat near enough, she reached for it with serious fingers. The first time he let her hold it, his face turned ashen. Nell moved to take the baby back. "Shall break it." No, the watch had belonged to his father. He explained in pieces over several evenings. It no longer kept time right. It ran fast and cold and slow near the stove. But Samuel had once held it between both hands and fallen asleep to the ticking. Clara did the same, tune in her mouth, watch against her cheek. After that, Daniel kept the watch on a nail by the cradle instead of in his pocket. A house tells the truth about who is welcome. At first Nell and the children seemed laid over Daniel's life like a blanket on furniture. Then things moved. Robbie's boots stood beside Daniel's by the stove, one pair small and patched, one pair large and mud-caked. Clara's cloths dried near the hearth. Nell's comb lay on the shelf under the cracked mirror. The black bonnet came down from the peg one afternoon when Nell asked, I clean this properly?" Daniel stood in the doorway with snow on his shoulders. "You don't have to. That was not what I asked." He took his hat off. "Yes." She brushed it, aired it, wrapped it in paper, and placed it in the trunk beneath Daniel's bed. not hidden, rested. He watched without speaking, but that night he split enough kindling to last a week and stacked it exactly where her hand reached easiest. In December, the town began talking harder. Nell heard it first at church. She had not wanted to go. Daniel had said nothing either way, but Robbie asked if church had singing, and Nell knew children needed to stand among other people without shame. She washed his face until he complained, dressed Clara in a bonnet made from one of Ruth's old handkerchiefs, with Daniel's permission, and put on her least worn dress. It had faded at the seams, but it was clean. Daniel hitched the wagon. The church smelled of damp wool, pine boughs, lamp oil, and hymnals. Heads turned when they entered. Nell felt each glance travel from her to Daniel to the children. She walked with Clara in her arms and Robbie's hand in hers, and she did not lower her eyes. Mrs. Prine shifted to make room in a pew, a kindness. Nell accepted it. During the hymn, Robbie sang the wrong words loudly. Daniel stood beside him, silent as always, holding the hymnal open, though he did not sing. When Robbie lost the place, Daniel lowered one finger to the line. After service, Reverend Pike shook Daniel's hand and greeted Nell with careful warmth. Then Mrs. Hester Vale, wife of the banker, approached with two women behind her like geese in formation. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said, "we have been praying for you. Thank you, and for Mr. Eldridge as well. It is a great thing, taking in burdens." Nell felt Daniel still beside her. Hester smiled in the manner of women who used gentleness as a blade. Of course, arrangements should be made clear. Children are easily confused by irregular households. Robbie looked up. "What's irregular?" Nell opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first. "Cold is irregular," he said. Hester blinked. "I beg your pardon. Baby auctioned in rain. A boy asking if bread costs his freedom. A town watching." Daniel's voice was low, each word forced through old rust. "That's irregular." No one moved. Daniel took Clara from Nell's arms because the baby had begun to fuss, and Clara settled against his coat as if she had chosen sides. He looked at Hester. "My roof is not." The women's faces changed, some with offense, some with shame. Nell stood so close to him. She could see a pulse beating in his jaw. He had spent more words in 10 seconds than she had heard from him in 10 days, and he had spent them like money he could not afford. On the ride home, wind snapped at the wagon cover. Robbie slept under a blanket, tired from singing and being stared at. Clara gnawed Daniel's glove. Nell watched the road. "You did not have to defend me, you rest, because of the children." He held the reins loose and steady. "Because of you." The answer was not tender in sound. It was plain, almost hard. But Nell turned her face toward the fields, so he would not see what it did to her. The outside world did not stop pressing. 2 days before Christmas, Silas Greaves rode out to the ranch with Sheriff Tom Larkin and a paper sealed in red wax. Daniel met them at the gate. Nell stood on the porch with flour on her forearms, Clara against her hip, and Robbie behind her holding a stove poker like a sword. Greaves removed his hat with false politeness. "Mrs. Kincaid, there seems to have been some confusion regarding your late husband's estate." "I have no estate." "Exactly. But debts remain. The $20 paid to me satisfied town relief, not private obligations. I have here an account for $12.40 from my cousin's freight company. Ezra Kincaid damaged harness and cargo before his death." Nell felt the porch tilt. "That is a lie." Greaves sighed. "Strong words from a woman in your position." Sheriff Larkin looked uncomfortable. He was a broad man with honest eyes and a weak spine. "Nell, the claim is filed. Judge won't sit until January, but Mr. Greaves asked peaceful notice be served." Daniel opened the gate. Greaves smiled. "I knew you would be reasonable." Daniel stepped through and took the paper from the sheriff, not Greaves. He read slowly. Nell had wondered if he could read well. He could. His brow did not change, but his tongue pressed into the paper until it bent. Greaves said, "If she is under your protection, Eldridge, you might wish to settle it before fees mount." Nell came down the steps. "I will settle my own debts when they are true." "That pride again?" Greaves said. "Remarkable thing, considering how recently you stood for bit." Robbie made a small sound, not a cry. Worse, a sound like something inside him had been kicked. Daniel moved so fast Nell hardly saw it. He did not strike Greaves. He did not shout. He simply stepped between the man and the porch, close enough that Greaves horse-backed. "Say auction again in front of the boy," Daniel said softly. Greaves swallowed. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Let's keep peace." Daniel did not look away from Greaves. "Peace has work to do, Tom." Greaves gathered his reins. "This is not finished." "No," Daniel said. "It ain't." When they rode off, Robbie dropped the poker. His face had gone gray. "Are they taking us?" he asked. Nell crouched and held his arms. "No, but he had paper." "Paper is not God." Daniel looked toward the road long after Greaves disappeared. Then he walked to the barn. Nell found him there an hour later, saddling the bay. "Where are you going?" "Town, to pay him." "Nah, then what?" Daniel tightened cinch. "Find Ezra's freight boss." Nell stepped closer. "You will not take this on like I am another broken fence." He stopped. "I mean it," she said. "I've been handled by men who called it help. I will not be handed from debt to debt while decisions are made over my head." His eyes met hers. The barn smelled of hay and leather and cold iron. "You're right," he said. The words startled her more than argument would have. He loosened the cinch and waited. "What do you propose?" he asked. No man had asked Nell that in 2 years. She breathed through the ache of it. "I go with you. Baby's sick. We take her wrapped. Robbie too. I want to hear the lie from the mouth that made it." Daniel looked toward the house, toward the weather building low in the west. "Storm coming. Then we go before it." They went. The road to Abilene was half frozen, half mud. The sky lowered all morning, and by noon snow began in hard little grains. Nell sat beside Daniel on the wagon bench this time, Clara bundled between them, Robbie in the back under the rope. The boy had not spoken much since Greaves left. He held the peppermint stick Daniel had bought weeks ago, now worn small and sticky in its paper. In town they found the freight office near the depot. The boss, a red-nosed man named Amos Rusk, remembered Ezra Kincaid. More than that, he remembered Greaves. "Damaged cargo?" Rusk barked. "Harness. That rig was rotten before Kincaid touched it. I told Greaves' cousin as much. Your husband died because they sent him out with a cracked brake pin." Nell gripped the counter. Rusk's face softened when he saw the baby. "I wrote a statement then. Nobody asked." "I am asking," Nell said. He gave it in ink with his signature and seal. When they stepped outside, snow had thickened. The wind drove it sideways. The depot bell clanged, and horses turned their tails to the street. Daniel looked north. "We don't make home before dark." "There's the hotel," Nell said. He glanced at her, and she understood at once. The hotel cost money, more than he wanted to spend, with Greaves circling and winter only beginning. "I can sleep in the wagon," she said. "No, Daniel, no." He took them to the livery instead. Not Greaves, a smaller one near the blacksmith, run by an old black man named Mr. Isaiah Bell, who had a steady voice and a limp. Daniel had traded with him before. Isaiah looked from the storm to Clara's flushed face. "Ain't no child sleeping in a wagon under my roof, if there's a stove in the tack room." The tack room was narrow, smelling of saddle soap, oats, and warm dust. Isaiah's wife brought a kettle, blankets, and a bowl of potato soup. Nell tried to refuse the soup out of habit. Mrs. Bell gave her a look only older women knew how to give. "Child, don't make me carry this back through snow." Nell accepted. That night, the storm sealed the livery doors with white. Horses shifted in stalls, harness creaked. Robbie slept in a nest of blankets with a barn cat against his stomach. Clara's fever rose. Nell sat on the floor near the stove, holding the baby upright so she could breathe. Daniel crouched beside her, sleeves rolled, dipping cloths in warm water, wringing them out, passing them without a word. Hour after hour, Clara fought for air. Nell's fear turned sharp and mean. I should have stayed at the cabin. Daniel took the damp cloth from her hand. Storm would come there too. I should have fed her better. You fed her what you had? I should have paid Greaves. His eyes hardened. No. She looked down at Clara's pinched face. I stood in that street and let men name a price over my children. Daniel's voice dropped. You stood. The stove popped. Nell shook her head. He leaned closer, forcing her to hear the little he had. You stood. That matters. It was not comfort. It was a correction, and because it was true, she began to cry without sound. Daniel did not touch her. He only sat near enough that she was not alone with the baby's breathing. Near dawn, Clara's fever broke. Sweat dampened her hair into dark curls. She opened her eyes, saw Daniel, and reached weakly for his watch chain. He took the watch from his pocket and placed it in her hand. Nell whispered, "She knows you." Daniel looked at the baby with a grief so tender, it seemed to frighten him. "Wish I knew how to keep what knows me," he said. The words hung between them, said less than they meant, said more than he had meant to allow. By morning the storm had buried the street to the hubs. Travel was impossible. They remained in the tack room another day, then another. During that time, Nell learned things about Daniel from Isaiah Bell, because Daniel would not tell them himself. He had come from Texas with a wife, a little boy, 2 horses, and a hope for land that could not be burned out by old memories. He had built the cabin with his own hands. Samuel died the first winter. Ruth stopped eating after spring and was buried before wheat harvest. After that, Daniel spoke mostly to animals, paid his bills on time, and never stepped into a dance, picnic, or supper. Man stayed alive, Isaiah said, while mending a bridle. Sometimes that's all grief lets you do, but alive ain't the same as living. Nell watched Daniel outside, helping shovel snow from the livery doors, while Robbie tried to make a path with a broken board. Daniel slowed his pace so the boy could believe he was helping. No, Nell said softly. It is not. When the road cleared enough, they returned to the ranch with Russ's statement wrapped in oilcloth. The cabin looked half-buried, smoke gone from the chimney. Daniel had banked the fire before leaving, but it had died. Inside, the air was bitter. Nell set Clara in the cradle, still wrapped, and began rebuilding warmth. Something had changed during their absence, not in the house, in the way they entered it. Daniel brought in wood without being asked. Robbie ran to check the hens and came back shouting that all 12 lived, and one was mad enough to preach. Clara, still weak, slept with Daniel's watch in her fist. Nell lit the lamp and put soup on, moving through the room as though she belonged there, because the children did. After supper, Daniel stood by the table with the oilcloth packet. Judge sits Monday, he said. I know. Greaves will twist. He always does. I'll speak. Nell looked up. In court? He nodded. You hate speaking. Yes, then why? He looked at Robbie, who was drawing crooked letters on Samuel's old slate. He looked at Clara, asleep in the cradle. Then he looked at Nell. Some silences cost too much. The hearing took place in a room above the bank because the courthouse roof leaked. Nearly half the town came, pretending business. Greaves wore a good coat. Nell wore her clean faded dress and Ruth's mended bonnet, because Daniel had asked very quietly if she would, not as claim, as honor. Robbie sat beside her holding Clara's blue shawl, though Clara stayed with Mrs. Bell downstairs by the stove. Judge Harrow read the claim. Greaves spoke first, oily and wounded, painting himself as a man burdened by Nell's ingratitude. He described Ezra as careless, He described Nell as unstable. He did not say auction, but his eyes did. Nell's hands stayed folded. In one palm, she held Ezra's brass button. Amos Rusk testified next and ruined Greaves' lie in plain language. The freight company owed no damage. The rig had been unsafe. Ezra had complained before the accident. Greaves' cousin had ignored it. Judge Harrow's face darkened. Then Greaves, cornered, did what cornered men often do. He turned cruel. Even if this account is disputed, he said, the court cannot ignore Mrs. Kincaid's condition. She has no home, no income but whatever arrangements she has made with Mr. Eldridge, and 2 minor children at risk. If the court cares for those children, it will place them where proper female supervision and means exist. Nell felt Robbie stop, breathing beside her. Greaves continued, I know a family in Salina willing to take the baby. The boy could be bound to farm service. Mrs. Kincaid, relieved of burden, might find respectable employment. The room blurred at the edges. Robbie whispered, Mama. Nell stood. Her knees shook, but her voice did not. My children are not burdens to be distributed. Greaves smiled sadly. Then provide for them. I have. Under another man's roof, Nell felt the trap. Every woman in that room felt it too. Accept help, be shamed. Refuse it, be called unfit. The law was a door men stood in. Daniel rose beside her. The room turned toward him. Some leaned forward, hungry to hear the silent cowboy spend himself. He removed his hat. His hair was dark, damp from snow. One hand held the back of the chair so hard his knuckles whitened. I paid $20, he said. Greaves' mouth curled. Yes, we know. Daniel looked at him. No, you don't. Silence. I paid a debt that should have shamed this town, not her. I did not buy Nell Kincaid. I did not buy Robbie. I did not buy Clara. His voice roughened. But he kept going. I bought back the chance for decent people to act decent before it was gone. Nell's heart pounded. Daniel reached into his coat and took out a folded deed. I own 160 acres north of Smoky Creek. Cabin, barn, stock, tools, winter stores. He laid the deed on the judge's table. I put half in Nell Kincaid's name this morning with Mr. Bell and Reverend Pike as witnesses. A murmur broke across the room. Nell stared at him. Greaves snapped. That is absurd. A transfer of land to a woman you barely. Daniel cut him off. To a woman who works it. Judge Harrow lifted the deed. Examined the signatures. Mrs. Kincaid, did you know of this? No, Nell whispered. Daniel turned to her then, and for the first time in that room his face changed. Not soft, exactly. Open, frightened in a way that had nothing to do with Greaves. You can sell it, he said quietly. Leave, stay, choose. But no man in this town will stand over you again, saying you have nothing. Nell could not speak. Robbie began to cry, trying to hide it with both fists. Daniel looked down, and the boy reached for him before remembering he had not been given permission. Daniel put one hand on Robbie's shoulder. That settled more than court could. Judge Harrow struck down the claim. He called Greaves' conduct predatory, which was a fine legal word for wicked. He ordered the original auction receipt entered into record as debt paid and warned that any further attempt to separate Nell Kincaid from her children without cause would meet the full displeasure of the court. Greaves left white-faced. Outside, snow had stopped. The street shone under pale sun. People gathered in uneasy knots. Shame makes folks want either to apologize or to explain why apology is unnecessary. Mrs. Hester Vale approached first, twisting her gloves. Mrs. Kincaid, she said. I spoke poorly at church. Nell looked at her for a long moment. Yes, Hester swallowed. I am sorry, Nell nodded. Thank you. It was not forgiveness dressed up for display. It was a door left unlocked, nothing more. Ada Prine came next with a parcel of cloth for Clara. No charge, she said. Nell did not take it. I pay for what I use. Ada's eyes filled. Then pay when you can. Daniel watched Nell decide. At last Nell accepted the parcel. I can mend for you twice a week through winter. Ada nodded quickly. That would help. Robbie tugged Daniel's sleeve. Does Mama own a barn now? Half? Which half? Daniel looked toward Nell. Nell answered, the half with the hens. Robbie frowned. That's the loud half? For the first time, Daniel laughed. It was not a large laugh. It came out broken and surprised, like an old gate opening. But everyone near enough heard it, and Nell carried the sound home, like fire in a covered pan. Yet gifts, even noble ones, can wound pride when they arrive without asking. That evening, after the children slept, Nell placed the deed on the table between them. You should have told me. Daniel sat across from her, hands folded. Yes, why didn't you? Thought you'd refuse. I might have. I know, that choice was mine. He lowered his eyes. Yes, the stove burned low. Wind moved around the eaves. Nell touched the edge of the deed. You gave away half your land? Nah, it says you did. He looked up. House was empty. Land was empty. Half of empty is empty. That is not true. It was to me. The anger in her chest faltered, because underneath his mistake was not control. It was terror. He had seen Greaves reaching for her children through the law, and had used the only shield he trusted. Land, paper, sacrifice. Still, she would not let even kindness take the shape of command. If I stay, she said, it will not be because a deed cornered me. No, ark this place. I have say in it. Yes, I leave. You will not stop me. His face tightened, but he said, no. Now leaned back. And if I stay through winter, it is as partner in the work, not charity, not debt. Daniel looked at the table between them, at her hands, at the brass button resting near the lamp. Partner, he said. The word was rough, but it held. Winter deepened. The kind of Kansas winter that made fence wire sing and left cattle bearded in frost. With the court matters settled, life did not become easy. It became possible. Possible meant Daniel teaching Robbie to carry kindling against his hip, instead of in front where he could trip. Possible meant Nell waking early to knead bread, her fingers pressing life into dough, while Clara sat on a blanket chewing a wooden spoon. Possible meant coffee kept warm for Daniel when he came in from breaking ice in the trough. Possible meant Daniel remembering to hang his coat on the lower peg, because Robbie liked to put his own beside it. Possible meant Nell adding a scrap curtain to the kitchen window, blue from Ada's parcel, so the room held morning light differently. The ranch changed one chore at a time. Nell organized the pantry and found enough waste in Daniel's bachelor habits to stretch flour further than he thought possible. She traded mending for seed. She patched the barn roof with Daniel on the ladder and Robbie below, handing nails one at a time. With the importance of a judge, she cleaned the smoke-blackened Bible and began reading a few verses after supper, not in a preachy voice, but because Robbie liked stories where small people survive giants. Daniel repaired the back fence, then the gate, then the step that had nearly thrown Nell twice. He built a shelf near the stove for Clara's cloths. He carved Robbie a wooden horse with one ear too short. The boy slept with it under his pillow and told no one. Clara grew fat in the wrists. That was how Nell measured mercy, not in promises, in fat wrists, in a baby who began to laugh when the rooster crowed, in Robbie leaving half a biscuit on his plate one morning because he was full and trusting breakfast would happen again. One night in January, Robbie woke screaming. Nell reached him first. Robbie, look at me. He clawed at his own throat. Don't sell Clara. Take me. Don't take her. Daniel stood in the doorway, face pale in lamplight. Nell gathered the boy, but Robbie fought, still trapped in dream. I can work. I can carry wood. Don't sell Mama. Daniel crossed the room and knelt. Robbie, the boy gasped. Daniel took the child's shaking hands and placed them flat against the floorboards. "Feel that?" Robbie sobbed. "Floor. Your floor." He moved one hand to the bedpost. "Bed. Your bed." Then to Nell's sleeve. "Mama. Yours." Robbie gulped air. Daniel pressed the boy's hand against his own chest, over the steady thud of his heart. "Ming," he said, standing. Robbie stared at him, tears shining. "You want let No, even if they got paper. No, even if they got money." Daniel's jaw worked, especially then. Robbie collapsed against him. Nell watched Daniel hold the boy awkwardly at first, then fully, one broad hand covering Robbie's back. Something inside her, guarded since Ezra died, took one careful step toward warmth. Later, when Robbie slept again, Nell found Daniel on the porch despite the cold. Moonlight silvered the snow, his breath smoked. "He will remember that," she said. Daniel leaned on the rail. "So will I." She stood beside him, wrapped in her shawl. The night was hard and bright. "Samuel had nightmares?" she asked. "After fever started, saw things. I am sorry. I am sorry. I wouldn't hold him near the end." Nell turned toward him. Daniel stared at the yard. "Doctor said sickness spread by breath. Ruth begged me not to. Said if I took sick, all of us lost. I stood at the door while he called for me." The confession came flat, like a man laying a dead bird on a table. Nell said nothing quickly. Quick comfort would insult a wound that deep. At last she asked, "Were you trying to live?" His hands gripped the rail. "Were you trying to keep your wife from burying two instead of one?" He closed his eyes. "Daniel." He did not answer. She put her hand over his on the rail. His skin was cold, the bones tense beneath. "Grief will call any mercy cowardice if you leave it alone long enough." A sound moved through him, not quite breath, not quite pain. He did not turn his hand to hold hers, but he did not pull away. Near the end of January, trouble came in weather and hooves. A blue norther blew down sudden, dropping temperature so fast the water buckets skinned with ice inside the kitchen. Daniel had ridden to check a line of cattle near the far draw. He should have returned by dusk. By dark he had not. Nell stood at the window, lamp behind her, seeing only her own reflection and the snow's white fury beyond. Robbie sensed fear. "Mr. Daniel knows snow, is better than us, is." That comfort failed them both. Another hour passed. Clara fussed, uneasy with the wind's howl. Nell banked the stove, wrapped the children, and made a decision. She would not ride blind into a blizzard with two children. She would not sit helpless either. She tied a rope from the porch post to the barn, then another from the barn to the pump, working in gusts that stole breath. She brought in extra wood. She heated stones and wrapped them in cloth. She hung the lantern in the window and another from the porch beam, though the wind nearly killed the flame. Then she loaded Daniel's rifle, not because she was skilled with it, but because fear respected preparation. At midnight, the bay mare stumbled into the yard without him. Nell ran into the storm. The mare's reins dragged. One stirrup was twisted. Blood streaked the saddle, not much, but enough. Robbie appeared on the porch screaming, "Mama, stay inside." Nell caught the mare and led her to the barn, hands numb. There she found a strip of Daniel's coat torn on the saddle horn. He had come off somewhere between the far draw and home. He was down in the snow. She had two children in the house, one baby still recovering from sickness. She had a man somewhere in a killing storm. Every choice was wrong. Nell put Robbie in charge of the stove. The boy's face went white. "I'm 6. You are Robbie Kincaid, and you know how to feed kindling. You keep Clara warm. You do not step off this porch. If I am not back by dawn, you take the lantern and go to the Bells Road when the wind drops." "I am scared." "So am I." His chin trembled. She knelt and gripped his shoulders. Courage is doing the next right thing with scared hands. He nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. Nell saddled the second horse, an old sorrel Daniel rarely used. She tied a lantern to the saddle, took a quilt, rope, and the bottle of whiskey Isaiah had left for cough rub. Then she rode into the blizzard, following the bay mare's broken trail before the wind erased it. Snow has a sound when it wants to kill. It hisses low across open ground and roars at the ears. It turns distance into nothing. Nell kept one hand on the reins and one on the rope tied to the saddle horn. Twice the sorrel drifted, and she corrected by the faint dark line of cottonwoods. Once she nearly passed Daniel's hat, half buried against a sage clump. She found him in a shallow wash, pinned under a fallen cottonwood limb. The horse must have slipped near the bank and thrown him. Snow had covered his legs. His face was bloodless. Daniel, his eyes opened a slit. Nell, yes, children, warm, home, waiting. He tried to move and failed. Go back. No, go. She crouched beside him, shaking so hard she could barely work the rope. You said my floor, my bed, my choice. Now hear mine. His eyes fixed on her. I am not leaving you to freeze. It took near an hour to shift the limb enough with rope and horse. Nell's gloves tore. Her palms bled. Daniel faded in and out. She cursed him twice for being heavy, which made him breathe something close to a laugh. When he was free, she wrapped him in the quilt and got him across the saddle belly down, because he could not sit. Then she walked the horse home, one step at a time, through snow that erased the world behind them. Robbie had kept the fire. The cabin glowed when Nell reached it. The porch lantern still burned. The boy stood inside the door with Clara on a blanket behind him and the stove poker in his hand. I did it, he cried. Nell could not answer. She was too busy getting Daniel inside. His leg was not broken, but his ribs were bruised, his shoulder torn, and the cold had eaten deep into him. Nell stripped his wet clothes with the efficiency of necessity and no foolishness, wrapped him in blankets, heated stones, rubbed his hands until color returned, and forced coffee between his teeth. At dawn, he woke to find Nell asleep in a chair beside him, one bandaged hand resting near his wrist. Robbie slept on the floor by the stove. Clara lay in the cradle holding his watch. Daniel looked around the cabin, not empty, never empty again. When he could speak, he whispered, "You came?" Nell opened her eyes. "You would have." He swallowed. "That different?" She leaned forward, weary beyond pride. "Not to me." Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in drips from the eaves, mud at the gate, hens laying more than expected, Clara standing by the table with both fists in the cloth, Robbie shouting over the first green blade near the porch, as if he had discovered gold. Daniel healed slowly and hated it. Nell made him sit. He argued with silence. She defeated him with work lists. "You can sharpen harness buckles sitting down," he glared. "You can shell beans sitting down." He looked offended. "You can teach Robbie numbers sitting down." He accepted that one. By March, Robbie could add egg money better than some clerks. Clara could say "da," which embarrassed Daniel so badly he went outside without his coat. Nell pretended not to see. Greaves' final blow came in April. He did not come alone. He came with a buyer from back east who wanted Daniel's land for a rail spur speculation and claimed the deed transfer to Nell was invalid due to an old filing error. This time Greaves did not ride to the ranch. He waited until Sunday, outside church, where people could watch him take back power. "The matter can be settled quietly," he said, holding another paper. "Mr. Eldridge signs sale of the full parcel. Mrs. Kincaid releases claim, and everyone walks away with a modest sum. Otherwise, court costs could ruin you both." Daniel stood on the church steps, still not fully strong. Nell stood beside him with Clara on her hip and Robbie holding Daniel's hand. The town gathered in that hungry half-circle again. Nell felt the old cold street rise around her. The auction bell, the mud, Robbie asking if they were horses, Greaves looked at her. Think carefully. $20 bought you shelter once. This offer buys you independence. Nell handed Clara to Mrs. Bell, who had appeared at her side like Providence wearing a brown bonnet. Then Nell stepped down one church step. No, Greaves' eyes sharpened. You have not heard the amount? I heard enough. You would refuse money. I refuse you. A murmur passed through the crowd. Greaves turned to Daniel. Control your household. The words struck like a slap. Daniel moved, but Nell lifted one hand and stopped him. She walked until she stood close enough to Greaves that he could see she was not trembling. You mistook silence for weakness once, she said. His and mine. That was your error. Greaves flushed. You are an ungrateful. No, Nell's voice carried across the churchyard. I am a mother. I am a landholder. I am a worker of that ranch. I am the woman you tried to sell in the rain, and I am still standing where your money cannot move me. Daniel came down the step then, not to stand in front of her, but beside her. He took off his hat. The churchyard quieted. I should have spoken years ago, he said. When Samuel died, I let this town become a place where grief made cowards of decent folk. I asked nothing, gave nothing, said nothing. Then I watched a woman and 2 children priced under a livery roof. He looked at the faces before him, one by one. I paid $20 that day. I would pay my land, my name, and my last breath before I let it happen again. Nell turned toward him. Daniel's hand found Robbie's shoulder, then Clara's small reaching fingers, then Nell's hand, not grabbing, asking. She let him take it. He faced Greaves. You want my household controlled? Here it is. Then, in front of church bells and mud and every soul who had once looked away, Daniel Eldridge said, Nell Kincaid is my family if she'll have me. Robbie and Clara are my family if they'll have me. Not by debt, not by pity, by choice. Robbie looked up at Nell, eyes wide. Clara reached for Daniel and said, clear as morning, Da. A sound went through the crowd that was almost a sob. Nell could have hidden. She could have turned shy, made smaller by public tenderness. Instead, she stood tall, her work rough hand in Daniel's, and answered in a voice steady enough for the back row. We will have you. Daniel's eyes shone. Though no tear fell, Greaves left with his paper unsigned. This time, the town did not let him pass easily. Amos Rusk stepped into his path. Isaiah Bell stood beside him. Sheriff Larkin, at last finding his spine, asked to see the paper. By supper, the old filing error was found to be no error at all, only another Greaves invention, dressed in ink. By the next week, Silas Greaves sold his livery and left Abilene under a sky that looked too clean for him. Nell and Daniel did not marry that day. They were not characters in a dime novel, rushing love because witnesses liked an ending. They went home with tired children, muddy hams, and a future that still needed feeding. But in May, when the prairie grass came up bright, and the creek ran gentle over stones, Daniel asked Nell properly on the porch. No grand speech. He had fixed the broken step. She had planted marigolds in 2 bean cans by the rail. Robbie was in the yard teaching Clara to throw pebbles, though she mostly dropped them on her shoes. Supper simmered inside. Coffee waited on the stove. Daniel held Ruth's ribbon in one hand and Ezra's brass button the other. Nell had given him the button to keep safe while she gardened. He had taken the ribbon from the trunk that morning. Past days, he said. Nell looked at the small objects in his palm. Yes, he drew a breath, but could sit kinder with us. The sentence was awkward, plain, and exactly him. Nell stepped close. Ask me, Daniel. His eyes lifted. Marry me. She smiled. That was not a question. For one terrible second. He looked stricken. Then he saw her smile and let out a breath. Will you marry me, Nell Kincaid? Yes, Robbie shouted from the yard. Does that mean he is ours legal? Nell laughed, and Daniel looked so undone by the sound that she loved him more for it. They married in June under a cottonwood near the creek. because Nell said the church had had enough of their sorrow and could wait for their ordinary Sundays. Mrs. Bell made a cake with dried apples. Ada Prawns sewed Clara a white bonnet. Robbie carried the rings in the same small cedar box that had once held Ezra's button, and he did not drop them, though he checked 6 times. Daniel spoke his vows low. Nell heard every word. He promised no easy life. She would not have trusted that. He promised a roof where no one would be priced, a table where children ate first only if they wanted to, a hand beside hers in work, and silence only when silence was kind. Nell promised to stay by choice, to speak when truth needed air, to keep warmth in the house and courage at the door, and to remind him when grief lied that love was not betrayal of the dead. When Daniel kissed her, it was gentle and brief. Robbie made a face, Clara clapped because everyone else did. Years later, folks in Abilene still told the story of the day silent Daniel Eldridge stopped an auction cold. Some told it as if the $20 were the miracle. Some told it as if land and court papers were the heart of it. But those who knew better would tell you the real miracle came later, in smaller things. It was Robbie leaving food on his plate without fear. It was Clara falling asleep to a crooked watch that never kept proper time. It was Nell's blue curtains lifting in a summer wind. It was Daniel's coffee cup set beside hers every morning, neither one empty long. It was a repaired gate, a worn stove, a Bible with a new cover, 2 bean cans full of marigolds, and a porch where no one stood alone in the rain. And if you had passed that ranch at sunset, you might have seen them through the kitchen window. Nell cutting bread at the table, Daniel carrying Clara in from the yard, Robbie showing off muddy boots he had been told twice to remove, and the whole house glowing gold behind them, not bought, not rescued like property, chosen again and again until the word home had hands, faces, footsteps, and a place set for everyone.